Okay. So,
Okay.
Lexie, welcome.
Okay. So today and possibly for half of next week's year, we're going to be doing Mavatal Isra Chachila. Fun topic, only a couple seifim, but part of why I think we might take a year and a half is there's a lot of really dense and interesting Nisei Kelim on this topic. So we're going to start off with the Torah Shulchan Aruch. I want to look. I think I'm going to have us go through all the seifim in the Torah Shulchan Aruch and the Nosei Kelim there. And then we'll start off with Hay and Shulchan Aruch this week and probably pick up with Vav and Zayin next week. Yeah. So I think I want us to start off. There's a couple relevant Gemaras for this topic, but I think the one that's most relevant is the one in Beitza that I gave you. So giving people a second to pull that up. And then
Tell us what, I don't have the sources with me, what page?
Beitza, it's Daled Amud Bet. It starts with Amar of Matana. Give me a thumbs up when you've got that somewhere. Okay. Jacob, could you read?
I can try. With Thanksgiving, I didn't get to look at things that much, unfortunately, but I'll try. Amarav Matana Eitzim Shanishru Min Hadekel Latoch Hatanor B'Yom Tov Marba Aleim Eitzim Muchanim Masikin.
Okay.
So Rav Matana said, like, wood that was like separate from a tree,
That fell off of a tree.
Tree, into an oven on Yom Tov. You can add onto them like wood that's already prepared for an oven. V'hak mahapech l'isura keven derova de tira ninhu ka mahapech ve'tira ka mahapech. So, and this.
So this is a challenge, right? V'hak hamahapech b'isura.
So this is like overturning something that's like usser.
So literally the mahapech is like the poking that you're doing when you're like turning over the wood, right? So the issue here is muktzah, right? That the wood that's fallen off of the tree on Yantif was not prepared to be firewood. It's muktzah. So aren't you now poking at the muktzah wood if you're using it? Then what's the answer?
Because most of the wood is permitted, if you're poking at it, it's permitted.
Right. You're mostly actually poking at heter wood, aka the like Isser wood, aka the mukta wood is like batel, right? This is not how we generally be talking about beetle, but I think also there's an echo somewhere. So wherever the echo is, could you mute? Cool. Right. So continue. Now that we've established that it would be fine because the mukta would be batal vis-a-vis the heter wood, we get to the Ikar Zigya for our topic. So V'ha
ka mevatel isur lechatchila. V'tnan in vatel isur lechatchila. So you should just like make the isur mevatel from the beginning. But we're learning
no, the ha come about like wait, but isn't this a case of bitul isur lechatchila? Right? If we Rav Matana is like, yeah, just add wood that's muchan, and it'll be fine. But we're like, wait, but wouldn't that be bitul isur lechatchila? And we saw in the Mishnah
that you can't mevatel isur lechatchila.
Seems like an issue. What's our answer?
Animili bidoraita. Aval bidorabanan mevatlin. Um, so these words are like for Torah prohibitions. Uh, but with Durabanan, you can mevatel an iser l'chachila.
Right. When that Mishnah was talking about in Vatal Isur L'Chila, it specifically meant Doraita Isuri. But Durabanans, it's fine. So if we ended the sugya there, it would seem actually pretty shot that according to anyone, at the very least, that you could mosif, that you could add on to a Durabanan Isur to batel it. But we have this next bit. So Ulurav Ashi.
Rav Ashi de Amar Kol Davar Sheyesh Lo Matirin Afilu B'Rabanan Lo Vatil My Iko Meimar. So for Rav Ashi, who says that anything that has something permitted, even if it's Dirabanan, you don't invalidate. What does there to say? How can he explain this?
Right. So this is one of the batel topics that we haven't gotten fully into yet, but a davar sheyesh lo matirin, right, is something that will come either generally via like just a time factor to become permitted, right? So this wood is only usher on Yantif, right? It's muktzah wood. It'll be permitted tomorrow. So with a davar sheyesh lo matirin, we say that it's what you don't need to batel it. It's going to be completely fine in a day. Right, so we say afilu be'elef lo batel. So how does he explain how this wood would become fine? What's the answer?
Hani mi ihechad ite leisura be'neha. So these words are like where it will become iser in his eyes.
So I think also just for in general with Hane Mile, kind of like when is this applicable, right? Like when is this principle applied, right? So the idea of Devar Sheyesh Lo Matirin being never batel is when the Isser is like visible, when it's still there and extant, right? But Hacha
Kali Isura. So like here, sorry, but I guess it's like with wood. How is one person passing by to know that it's not wood he can use?
Right, here it's burnt. Here the Isser like is being literally like used up even as it's being mixed with things, right? So that like when the Isser is literally like vanishing as it goes, then he would say Devar Sheyesh Lo Matirin can be batel. Now we'll see. There's a question as to whether this kind of mikla kale sora is only a response to Rav Ashi and the issue of Devar Sheyesh Lo Matirin to mevatel for l'chachila across the board. So we'll hold that in our brains. And we're gonna move on to the tour. So we're in Sadi Tet, Siv Hay. So we start off with a fun machloket between the smag and the tour. So Raphael, can you start us off in the tour on Hay?
Sure. כסף ספר המצוות שצריך חכם לחקור אם נתנו מים בקדירה אחר שנתנו בה האיסור. שאת המים שנתנו אחר כך הם מצטרפים לבטל האיסור. So basically what the smag says is that we have the chacham, the one being asked about the kashrut question, needs to actually try to investigate, like try to understand, maybe not from direct, probably not from direct, like what they said, because we don't actually somech aleim ad hasof, we don't have complete confidence on them. But when if after the isur fell on the kdira, someone tried to save it by adding more water or adding any mutter substance, because that would be bitul isur lekatchila. That's basically what he's saying.
Well, maybe.
Maybe,
I would say Yeah,
Highly
try and just
dispute.
translate it here now, because that does appear to be what we're saying in context, but we'll see different interpretations of what the
Yeah, of
smog's
course.
concern is.
So no, so basically what he's saying is that it won't add up for some, like it simply doesn't add up later because the
Right,
issue was already there.
Right, that if like the pot is being brought in front of the chacham, and like right now there's shishim, opposite the iser, the chacham needs to ask whether some of this like heter liquid or whatever was added after the iser fell. Because if it was, then for one reason or another, the iser would not be batel. So now the Torah comes in.
Yes, just ונראה לי שאין צריך אפילו אם הוא יוסיף מים אחר כך, אם לא כיוון לבטל האיסור מצטרפים. דקיימנן, כל האיסורים שריבה עליהם שוגג מותרים. So that's when simply the tool enters in with the question of riba b'shogeg לעומת b'mezid, that if there is no intentional will to actually cancel out the issue, and it's like, I don't know, he's simply panicking because his stew was ruined, so he added more water because he thought that might help the situation, but he didn't have any aloch shemahaylach in his mind, so that would make it okay. And basically what he's saying is that we don't assume he did it by mazid, even if it happened afterwards. So we don't need to ask from the beginning. Most of the chances is either it happened before, or even if it happened afterwards, it can be shogeg. So we don't need to ask.
Well, we'll get into his logic, right? So he's minimally saying, he's like, the plain words of the smog seem to suggest that like if the water was added after the Isser fell in, it just wouldn't be batel. And he's like, no, I mean, like if this happened b'shogeg, we have the principle that it should be batel, right? And so shkoyach, like if it's shogeg, then we shouldn't have a problem. Actually, this mixture, as long as there's now shishim opposite the Isser, should be completely kosher, right? Like the mazid, right? If you rebab a mazid, asurin, right? But the ein lachush.
ואין לחוש שמא יבואו לרבות במזיד. You don't need to actually be worried that someone of the people who ask you might have done it with intention to actually levatel isu, or he did it purposely, actually added from the beginning the isu to the k'deira to be able to levatel it because he wanted to eat some, I don't know, pork in a kosher way. שאם באנו לחוש לזה, לא להאמין לו מה שאומר שלא ריבה. So he even says that if we begin to lachush in the circumstances, we can't actually even believe that he did it before, because if he's mazid, he could say that even though he did it afterwards, he would say that he did it before because he knew the chacham would actually prohibit it.
Right. I mean, basically, what the smog, like the Torah is trying to push back against the smog's very suggestion that we should do this chakirah, right? Because he's like, okay, either the like addition happened b'shogeg, in which case, great, everything's mutar, or it happened b'mezid, in which case things are usser. But like, if we're worried that people are doing this b'mezid, then what's it going to help if we have this chakirah? Like, if it's somebody who's such a rasha that we like think that they're intentionally trying to batel their isser, then like, why would we believe they're going to tell us the truth about that, right? Like if that was their whole point, they're probably not going to come to a chacham to ask about the status of their pot. They're probably just going to eat it. So according to the Torah, he's like, I don't see why this chakirah would work, why it would be necessary in any scenario. So let's pause there because we'll get to the mekaven there, but thank you, Raphael. But now we're going to get to a fun machloket as to how to understand the Torah's issue with the smog and what the smog is talking about. Because we have a couple different suggestions. So we'll start off in the Big Yosef. Also, wait, one brief note on Girsa is that if you have the Shirat Devora edition, it says the Shema Yavo, they're both b'mezid in the Torah. But the Bach comments on this that he thinks his girsa and what he thinks is the correct girsa is Shema Kiven Leherbot, right? That our concern is not about like lest they come to intentionally do it. Our concern is lest they intentionally did it this time, right? And we're saying that like that's not going to be a chashash. Otherwise, why would they go to the chacham? Okay, so Beit Yosef on Hey, the Mashakatav Rabbeinu Shnira Li She'en Tzarich. Alice.
Yes, you said Beit Yosef on Hey, Katav Sefer Mitzvah.
I think it's the next one, but I think Lexie paused on us.
It's strange. That is strange. We're in the same house. Okay, the next one I have Aval Hamekevan Herbot Afilam Humi Bimino.
I think Mashiach Rabbeinu Shenire Li She'en Tzarich Shafila, right, Lexie? That's yeah.
Yeah. Right, so it's the first big Beit Yosef in Hey. Starts with in the Beit Yosef.
Oh god, yeah, sorry. Okay. Mashiach Rabbeinu Shenire Li She'en Tzarich Afilu Im Hasif Mayim Achar Kach Im Lo Kivin Kedei Levatel HaYisur Mitzvah. Yoreh Deah Siman וצריך לומר, דהיינו תמה דספר המצוות, דחיישינן שמה במה שהיה בקדרה תחילה, לא היה 60 כנגד האיסור, ונעשה כל חתיכת נבלה. וכשירבה עליו היתר, צריך 60 כנגד כל מה שבקדרה. והשתנף גלן טובה בחקירה זו, שאם לא יחקור ודאי יתיר אותה, כיוון שימשה שיש בה שבקדרה 60 כנגד חתיכת האיסור. וכשיודע לו שניתנו מים בקדרה אחר שנפל באיסור, אפשר שיסיר שיעור אותם במים במה שבקדרה, לא היה במה שבקדרה 60 כנגד חתיכת האיסור, ונעשה כל מה שבקדרה חתיכת נבלה. וצריך 60 כנגד הכל. Should I pause there for a second? Keep going.
Read a couple more lines.
ואם אין במים שניתנו אחר כך 60 כנגד כל מה שבקדרה, נמצא שהכל אסור. אבל אם יהיה באותם מים 60 כנגד כל מה שבקדרה, מודו דמישרא שרי, אם ניתנם בשוגג, כדקיימלן, דכל האיסורים שריבה עליהן שוגג מותרים.
Okay, so you don't have to translate that word for word, but summarize.
Okay, so the Sefer makes the Smag is worried about if when the Isser first fell into the pot, there wasn't 60 to battle it, therefore everything in the pot became nevela. And then when you're pouring in some extra water, you would need 60 against all of that original mixture that now has the Isser in it.
Yeah, pretty much like, right, so the Beit Yosef says the Smag is not disagreeing with the principle of Koiseri and Shari Bale and Shogeg Mutarin, right? Like he doesn't disagree that works. It's just that he's worried that like if we have this water being added later, it's possible that like unless it's a massive amount of water, vis-a-vis what was in your pot, that if the Isser wasn't batel in the initial amount, it was all like Naset Nevela, and now everything would be Isser, right? And so like that's actually what the Smag is concerned about. And now he's going to explain why the Torah disagrees, right? The Smag v'smak l'ta'amai hu azle.
V'smak l'ta'amai hu azle. T'chol ha'isurim amrinan chaticha atzma ne'aset nevela. אבל הרבה מן הפוסקים סוברים שלא אמרו חתיכה עצמה נעשה נבלה, אלא בבשר וחלב דווקא, כמו שנתברר בסימן סעידה. ושם כתבתי דהכינתינן. הלקח רבנו עיקר, שאין צריך לחקור חקירה זו. Okay, so big deal in Hilchos Isser v'Heter. The Beit Yosef, the Torah does not hold chaticha neaset vela for anything besides basar b'chalav. The Beit Yosef agrees with him, and that is the Beit Yosef thinks that is why we do not need this chakira, because the Torah is cholek on the let's say the smag and the smag.
Right. So the Beit Yosef's like basic explanation of the Torah and the Smag's disagreement is just like, do we hold Chanan b'shar Yisurim? Right. The Smag's concern here has nothing to do with Riba b'shogeg. It's purely, did Chanan happen? In which case, almost certainly the food's not going to be kosher, because as we see in various places, the likelihood of you getting shishim times whatever the initial amount was is slim to none, unless you have an extremely wide and thin pot. And the Torah, who only thinks that Chanan applies to Basar v'chalav, isn't concerned about this, and so he generally thinks what we have in front of us is going to be kosher. That's the Beit Yosef's explanation. How do people feel about it? People like Beit Yosef's explanation. Do they find it convincing? Obviously, you're influenced probably by reading the responses to it, but yes, no. Aaron?
I think on a textual level, I think it was the Darchei Moshe, maybe also the Shach, who points out that the way the Torah has written this, it seems like he would think this is the case for Basar b'chalav as well, suggesting that it's not an issue of who holds Chanan for what. That said, I think that is probably because the Torah just left it out. I think this does seem like a fair assessment of the machloket. Yeah, with the exception of that point, which I think is like potentially just a stylistic issue or like an oversight, Rahman al-Islam by the Torah.
Right. So as you pointed out, as we'll see in the Darchei Moshe, who very vehemently disagrees with the Beit Yosef's explanation, he does think the fact that like the Torah seems to say this across the board would suggest that this isn't about Hanan, because we still do believe that in some cases. But yeah, it's entirely possible that the Torah just spoke about the majority of scenarios, although it's like most of the time that we're dealing with this, realistically, probably it would be Basar v'chalav. So like, does feel like a bit of a weird thing for the Torah to leave out. But Nachum, you're give a response. Do you not agree that would be our main Lamaisa scenario?
Sorry.
It's okay.
Maybe I agree. You're right. I mean, in general, here we're for sure. This is the Siman of Taravot. So it is fair to say that he's not talking about Basar b'chalav here. I had a question though. According to the Beit Yosef, where do we come out with this statement? Kol isurim sheriba lehem b'shogeg mutarin. Is there a machloket about that statement?
So no, the Beit Yosef seems to say no. I mean, the Beit Yosef comes up with other issues vis-a-vis where he thinks the Torah is getting this principle and how the Torah holds on other things. But he doesn't seem to think that there's a machloket about us holding this principle, right? He seems to think that like Dafka, why he's explaining the dispute as being about Hanan is that no, we don't disagree about the idea of Ribale and Shogeg Mutarim theoretically. It's just that like in any place where Hanan is applicable, that would be really hard to be an actionable principle.
Right.
Somebody had a hand up, Sarah.
Yeah, I think that there's a way in which the Beit Yosef's explanation is very elegant, but I also think that it doesn't take the Torah like at his own word, because the Torah says, right, the Torah gives an explanation for his own position. Yeah, the following thing, why? Like he gives an explanation of why he thinks the way he does, and it's not that, oh, I just have a disagreement with the Smag about Hanan. So like if he thought that it was a question about Hanan b'Kol Yisurim, then he would have said that, and he didn't say that. He said something else. So I don't know.
So what's the answer? In other words, what's the Beit Yosef really doing?
You don't. Oh, you want him defense? Because I was like, you don't need to give a definitive answer. We'll look at the other possibilities. But yeah, if anyone wants to defend the Beit Yosef, I do think that's a very good critique, right? Like the Torah, if his disagreement was just about Hanan, like why would that come up here, right? Like we have Hanan elsewhere, right? We see elsewhere the Torah and us articulating that that line of Psak doesn't follow Hanan b'shar Yisurim. So like that was what he was disagreeing about here. He could have just said that. So yeah, anyone
Right.
wanna...
And furthermore, he gives another reason why he thinks what he does.
I think Aaron wanted to say something.
Sorry, I was actually swiping him off, but I will say if it's not Hanan, it's not clear why the Smag would not hold by the principle the Torah cites of B'shogeg Mutar B'mezid Aser. So we'd have to find an explanation for why the Smag, I mean, as the Darchei Moshe does. Another reason he wouldn't hold that, I think what's elegant about the Beit Yosef is Hanan explains why the Smag doesn't necessarily need to be cholek on that particular principle.
Yeah, I do think that we have a hard time, and like we'll go through this and we can, weigh in after we've gone through all the other potential explanations. But I do think it's hard finding one of the explanations of their disagreement that takes both the Smag and the Torah very seriously, right? Like I think it's hard. A lot of the explanations end up with one of them seemingly either not being read at their word or in shot context of what they're saying, or saying something that feels kind of non-intuitive.
Well, I think what's going on is, I just want to say quickly that the Beit Yosef is saying that the Tur misunderstood this Smag. No, that's the point. He's saying, to address what Sarah was saying. In other words, but the Tur gives a reason. Yeah, so the Beit Yosef is saying, yeah, but you misunderstood what the Smag was saying, so your reason is not relevant.
No, but I don't think that, like, as in I find it hard to read that into the Beit Yosef. Like, I think the Beit Yosef is saying, like, the Torah, because he's saying the Torah believes, he's defending the Torah saying we don't need a chakirah, right? That, like, the Torah, as we see elsewhere, believes, like, that we don't say Hanan B'shari Sorim, which is why we don't need a chakirah. He seems to be saying that's the explanation of why the Torah would disagree on this principle, right? If he thought that the Torah was just misunderstanding the Smag, then the Beit Yosef would seemingly add something about, like, yeah, and this is why he said it, and for us, this applies in the case of Basar B'challah. Like, I don't think he's claiming that the Torah is misunderstanding the Smag. I think he's just saying this is what they're disagreeing about. This is what you didn't see, like, under the text.
He doesn't. He thinks. See, the Torah thinks that the reason that the Smag needs to do the Hakira is because he doesn't hold by this idea of Kol Isurin Sheriba Alehen. That's why he says, I'm Mr. Tur, and I hold of this opinion that Kol Isurin Sheriba Alehen B'shogeg Mutarin. And you, Smag, don't hold by that, obviously. And the Beit Yosef is coming and say, no. The reason that he held his opinion is because he holds Hanan. And that's why you have to do the Hakira. But he, of course, agrees with your opinion that Kol Isurim Sheriba Aleh and B'shogeg Mutarin. So, but the Torah didn't get that, because if the Torah had gotten that, he would have said a different thing, like Sarah said. He would have said, but I hold B'shar Isurim no Hanan, so therefore I disagree with the, that's the way I understand what the Beit Yosef is doing. He's saying, I'm smarter than you, Mr. Tur. That's the way I saw it. Okay. But I hear what you're saying.
That's not how I read the Beit Yosef, but I also, I think it's good for us to keep in mind, like, obviously, like I said earlier, it's kind of hard to do generous reads of everybody in this, that we end up often assuming somebody is reading something wrong or somebody thinks somebody else is reading something wrong. But I do think it's always, like, kedai for us to explain why the Beit Yosef wouldn't just be making, like, a silly explanation that is clearly not what the Torah was saying. That being said, that does seem to be what the Ramah believes in Beit Yosef. So, Sarah, since you were not a big fan of the Beit Yosef's reading, do you want to read the Darchei Moshe on Bet?
Sure. Okay. V'tzarich iyun lama katav stam de'ein tzarich lachkor achar zeh zaharei lefi dvarav b'makom shechanan kegon bebasar b'chalav tzrichin lachakira azo v'haya lo lefarish ve'od delefi ma shekatavti la'el v'siman tzadi bet anu nahagim b'kol isurin chanan ve'im ken anu tzrichim lachkor achar chakira zo b'kol isurin lefi dvarav. אבל נראה לי, דאין דבריו נכונים משום דהד כתב רבינו, דקיימה לן כל איסורין שירבה עליהם בשוגג מותרים. כי הכל איסורין. אפילו בבשר וחלב. אף על גב דלכולי עלמא חנן, סביר לי דאפילו הכי אם רבה בשוגג, אף על גב דאין שישין לבטל כל הקדרה, אפילו הכי שרי. דמצטרף כל ההיתר יחד לבטל האיסור. Harishon Shanaf. Okay. So should I stop there?
Yeah,
Do you want me to keep
that's just
going?
kind of him setting it up.
Right. That's
so-
basically the initial setup. So he's going to say, well, it doesn't make sense that the Beit Yosef says this because elsewhere it seems like he does with respect to Basar V'Chalav, it would seem to be that since we do even the Beit Yosef holds Chanan there, then obviously it would be the case that, or the Torah does rather, then it would obviously be the case that you would need this kind of Chakira, but he says you don't need it. So then that seems like a problem.
Right. And then also he's saying, like, when it says like this principle of the Riba B'Shogeg, he seems to be saying that, as pointed out, like stam, like across the board. We don't seem to be saying like, so we have to be talking about something else.
Right. So we must be talking about something else. Should I keep going?
Right. So Shari Mister if Kola Heter Yachad Vatela Isor Harishon Shadafal Hoil.
Holio venis rabba b'shogeg v'had amrinan chanan hainu im ervu b'meizid de'ad amrinan chanan uva'inan shishim neged kol yisur v'im lev l'kulei alma asur af la'acharine delo mitchavin levatel biginaihu aval lididei o mechavin levatlo bishvilo afilu v'lo chanan asur kedelakaman. Okay, so sorry, go ahead.
No, so this is his first explanation. The Darchei Moshe gives us 3 possible answers. This is his first one.
Okay, so the first one is, if you thought, okay, so if you okay, so basically he's going to say no matter what you think about Hanan, you're still going to be in the world where if you mix it around b'mezid, it's asur. So even if basically the Hanan question is irrelevant here, either you think there's Hanan, in which case obviously it's asur, or you think that you've even if you don't think there's Hanan, once you're starting talking about someone who's like mixing the pot, that's sort of sufficiently mazy that even if you're just relying on this general rule, then you're going to end up saying it's asur.
Right. So I think his first suggestion is actually just a very radical one that we end up pretty much no one ends up actually going with, which is that actually, yes, we disagree. Like we have these different threads of the halacha, whether you go like Rabbeinu Ephraim or the Ri and Rabbeinu Tam, vis-a-vis whether we say Hanan only with Basar B'Chalav or Shari Sorim. But he's like, maybe everyone agrees that Hanan only applies when it's like Ribab Amazid, right? When the next bit of heter that's being added to whatever has initially not been batelled was added intentionally. But maybe everyone would agree that Hanan doesn't occur if there was no mixing intentionally, right? Like that actually, if it was done like Ribab Shogeg, Hanan didn't happen, right? Like Stam. And then he's like, sure, like when you add B'mezid, then like it's forbidden regardless, because at least for like the person, the Mivatel or Misha Bitel Bishvilo, because even if we don't think the food itself is like the kind of like the heftza of the food is usher, we say that like the knas is that they can't eat it, right? But it's a pretty dramatic suggestion. The Shach pretty roundly rejects it in something that we'll glance at, but it's his first attempt. He doesn't really like it either because he gives a different answer. Ilana, could you pick up with the Uika Lamemar? The top of the second column of the Darchei Moshe in bet.
או איכא למימר, דאף אם נתערב בשוגג, איכא למימר, חנן, ואף אגב דקיימלן כל איסורים שריבה עליהם שוגג מותרים, היינו דווקא היכא דלא נודע התערובת קודם שריבה, אבל לאחר שנודע התערובות, לא מהנה מה שריבה אחר כך, ולכן אמרינן חנן. וזה תירוץ נכון. So this is the distinction between that whether or not Hanan happens depends on whether the tarovet happened b'shogeg or b'mezid, because which is what the Torah says, kol isrum sheri b'aleim shogeg mutarin. That we only say it's shogeg mutar. We only say it's mutar when it's shogeg when he didn't know about this tarovet with an isur before he added more heter. But if the person knew that there was this problematic mixture and then added more, then it doesn't matter whatever he adds. It can't batel the isur. It's chanan, like it's already become the whole thing has already become a sur. So adding more heter is not going to help.
Right. So his second suggestion, which, as you know, we see at the end, V'zeh teretz nachon, he seems to think is the best suggestion, is also one in which we limit the application of Hanan
to what you know, to what he knows, to the consciousness of the person. No, like again, Hanan depends on the consciousness of the person who's trying to add more heter.
For sure, that in this case, unlike his first suggestion, which is that Hanan only happens when there's like attempts to do bitul b'mezid, here he says, okay, no, Hanan could also happen when we have a shogeg factor at play, but once you are aware of the initial mixture, right? Like my bacon bit falls into 40 times its amount of kosher soup, right? And I'm like, oh crap, bacon fell into my soup. And then 5 minutes later, my friend spills some more soup into there, right? In that case, we would say Hanan happened, if we hold like the Ramah, right? For Shari Sorian. But like, if my friend spilled more soup into that and somehow like I didn't discover the Isser had been mixed in until after additional heter was added, Hanan never occurred, right? Even for us who all Hanan b'Shari Sorim, Hanan didn't occur if I didn't know about that initial unbatel mixture before enough heter was added that now the Isser is batel. Right, and so then according to this, what's the purpose of the Hakirah? Aaron?
To find out whether you became aware of the mixture before you poured in the water afterwards.
Right, which we'll see the Jerisha kind of get into this. Like, I think the Torah's Kashya could still kind of remain. I mean, it's possible that we say we think people might not know about this rule, right? That I think probably the best way to like defend the smog, according to this explanation, right, would be that he says like we're not worried about people lying because it might be that like people just don't know about like the whole instance of like Hanan only applies im nodahat ha'rovet. Joel?
Yeah, I was looking at the smug. The smug's case here actually is not about a piece of meat, but a spoon. And which makes a lot more sense actually per the Darchei Moshe's explanation, and we'll see this in other times with spoons too, but if you're like cooking stuff and you're mixing with the spoon and you don't think about it, it's a lot more likely that shalom nodaben time than it is like I dropped in a piece of meat, I took it out, and then I spilled something else in it, kind of thing. So
yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? The idea of just like absentmindedly stirring, right? And you just you just forgot.
And then pouring the water in afterward would be shogeg, even if you did it intentionally, because you didn't even know that there was a problem here. So that's called shogeg. You're just pouring water innocently.
Right. So this would make a lot of sense if we say like, yeah, you accidentally like you have a little hole in your, as we see later in all your dairy spoons, but you weren't paying attention. you've been stirring your like meat stew with the spoon, dips in twice, you poured some more water in, and then you pull out the spoon and you're like, oh no, it's my dairy spoon, right? Like you hadn't realized that it had happened like while you were just pouring it in. More water is added, and now great, like there's enough in your stew to batel the amount of that spoon.
But the Ramah,
For me-
I mean, we're not, the Darkei Moshe here is expanding it. He's not talking only about a spoon.
Correct, yes, but as Joel points out, like this explanation works, I think, more intuitively with the Smog's particular case. I think it can become harder for us to imagine the logistics of this explanation when we're dealing with just like Isser falling into a pot.
You didn't realize till later you
Sure.
dropped in Chalev instead of Shuman, right? You know, but that it, which can happen. I mean, that I think is
It is a classic case.
What do you think
Although-
the Ramah's attitude is towards Hanan? Is it, in other words, is it a physical construct or is it a legal construct?
Well, we see it's kind of a mix.
It seems like it has to be a legal construct because it's depending on the consciousness of the person who's doing it rather than on anything inherent in the mixture itself, no?
Well, it depends which teretz you go with, right? The first, the Beit Yosef, right, clearly sees it as some sort of physical, quasi-scientific reality. It's either the chemical reaction is kicked in or it hasn't. The first Darkei Moshe is saying it is purely a subjective state. We're imposing a societal penalty for doing something nemezid. For me, this third explanation is kind of this weird Frankenstein option of in between, and having to
we
deal
haven't
with
gotten to the
consciousness,
third
right?
one yet, so we'll
No,
get
the one, I mean, the second Darkei Moshe, right? It's like, is it a physical thing? Is it in our collective minds? Is it both? It doesn't really cobble together so clearly.
right. I think that like we can also say that like it certainly is related also to our ideas and ultimately of like Efshar Toasor, right? And I think, you know, we'll get into this more maybe when we like really do the Hanan material fully inside, but there's a lot of kind of like wrestling between how much those two concepts overlap and how much they're distinguishable, right? And so I think part of the idea is that like Lach Balach, for example, you know, the Hanan is not such a reality, right? Because, and what we'll see also, some people hold that way even across the board, right? Because we end up saying like everything gets like fully mixed together, right? There actually isn't some kind of like distinct initial mixture that retains its own identity once more heter has been added, right? But that like in scenarios where whatever is added does like not become fully and entirely integrated with the first thing that was like ne'asar, right? Then we're saying, yeah, there actually is some kind of like physical component. I think the very fact of saying that Hanan, at least that some people believe Hanan doesn't apply to Lach Balach, and no one thinks it applies to Yavesh B'Yavesh, means we certainly do have a physical component in mind, right? There's a reason everyone agrees that the principle applies in Balua scenarios and not in Yavesh B'Yavesh, because there is a part of it that is about like, what is the physical identity and mixture happening here, right? The Ramah is just saying at a minimal that it's like, it's not purely a physical fact, right? There is also very much a, how am I relating to this mixture? Ilana, I think you're muted.
No, so maybe we can say there's a physical precondition in order for Hanan to be able to happen. The right physical conditions have to be there, but then it depends on the consciousness of the person in order for it to kick in. Also, I think in the second explanation in the Darkei Moshe, the chiluk he makes between mezid shogeg versus kavanah is just very interesting because I don't know, I usually, maybe I haven't seen enough, but I usually think of those as being basically the same thing. But you know, here we can say you can ribala b'mezid even if you don't have the you know, in other words, you know, like you intend to put more in, but not for the sake of battling the Isur because lo no dalo. So that chiluk is just like it's a very fine line, but it's very interesting distinction.
Right. We'll hopefully get into this. I think this will probably end up being next week, but the Taz talks about how we're defining shogeg vis-a-vis kavanah versus knowledge about the halacha, which becomes also relevant in other halacha. Rav Landis, you're muted.
Yeah, I was going to say a little bit about this consciousness. In terms of doing an Avera, right, we have two types of shogeg. We have shogeg, don't know what we're doing, which is korov la'anus. You pass by a light and you brush by it. Maybe that's even anus already. But then it's called shogeg, you don't know, didn't know what you were doing. And then you have shogeg, you don't know the halacha. It gets interesting here because there's nothing wrong with having things that are usher, you just can't eat it. I mean, you can make something. So aim about is it's an interesting kind of consciousness. What exactly are you doing? I'm just saying that to be ma'orer as we see things. That's one idea. The other thing I want to kind of throw into the pot is the notion of, I'm reminded still of the prior halachas that we judge what's lefanenu, and we're often resisting what to try to figure out unless we know, unless we pay attention, unless we saw the stuff. We resist to try to produce a narrative about how much was there by some sort of deduction or some sort of intuition. We kind of resist that. We try to move to lefanenu. What does that mean? It means is that consciousness often leads to Easter, and non-consciousness leads to a physical, the reality of what's in front of you. So I'll just leave that as part of the, should be a question, but not a question yet. So the two parts are the notion of distinguishing for us the difference between knowing an action that we're doing and knowing the halacha back, and also the notion I'm throwing out that day there is that lefanenu becomes for us often a corrective of prior knowledge. I'll leave it at that.
Right, that we see certainly some of the preference towards lefanenu also has to deal with what is the actual material reality we're dealing with at this moment that I'm now considering what is in front of me. And yeah, as you pointed out, and as we're talking about with Hanan in general, we have this push and pull between, we seem to have a bottom line, and this also comes up with kama batel, of when there is physical recognizable isser, it's just not batel. Something should not be permitted if you if isser is nikar, right? But once we get past that point, once we get past the point of a tasteable, recognizable, distinct isser, we have questions of when it is and isn't okay. Okay, so I want to finish up this Darchei Moshe. I'm going to read within his second Teirutz, right, the one that he thinks is correct. Look in the middle from Ve'en Lahakshot, right? He's trying to explain the Torah according to this. Ve'en Lahakshot lefi divarai, dim kain, lama katav Rabbeinu de'eno tzarich lishol, halo tzarich lishol, shemano da b'intayim, da'az lo mahane ma shenitar beh. Right? He's like, okay, well, I've explained the smog well as to what we would be asking about, but now I need to explain why the Torah isn't saying something silly by suggesting we don't need a chakira, right? If this whole idea is that Hanan happens in Modad time, that feels like an important thing to ask about. Yesh lamar the sphirale de laha lo chayshinan de mistama ilu hayano da time miyad haya balachacham lishol madino, right? That maybe the Torah is very confident that as soon as people as soon as people would know that there's been a mixture, they're not going to keep hanging around their kitchen and cooking, right? They're going to immediately go to the Chacham to ask what the deal is. So he's not really worried about the case of noda ben taim and then more heter is added. He doesn't really think misama that's going to occur. והעריך שכתב מטעם זה צריכים לשאול פסק הסמ"ג שצריך לשאול. וכדי לתרץ דברי הסמ"ג שלא יקשה עליו, הדקאי מלן כל ייסורין שנתרבו שוגג מותרין, לכן חילק בין נודע בינתיים ולא נודע, בזה מתרצים דברי ספר המצווה, ולא תרצו של בית יוסף. Right, so this is his preferred teretz. That being said, he gives us a third option. בעוד נראה, אפשר להתור מחלק בין הדה אמרינן חתיכה נעשית נבלה, להדה אמרינן כל ייסורין שריבה עליהם וכולי, כמו שמלחק בתשובת הרשב"א, שכתב דווקא אם תרב לך בלך ויבש ביבש, אמרינן דאמרי בא עליהם שוגג וכולי. אבל כל שאסור משום בלוע, כגון איסור שנפל על חתיכה, ויש בה בנותן טעם, ואחר כך נתרבה היתר לבטל, אינו מועיל. דאמרינן ואפשר לצורכתו אסור עד כמה לשנו. Right? Maybe we're dealing with the distinction between lach balach and yavesh biyavesh cases and balua, right? This gets back to what we're saying about like the physicality of Hanan, saying that like everyone agrees like that like Hanan isn't such, everyone agrees Hanan isn't a thing with yavesh biyavesh, right? That there's actually just like, if I have one truma apple mixed with one other heter apple, and then some other apples fell into this basket. There is nothing remotely distinct about those first two apples, right? There just isn't. So everyone agrees Hanan is not a thing with Yavesh B'Yavesh. Lach Balach is a dispute. But he's saying, yeah, Balua, there is something, this relates to our Efshtar Soch Toasor idea, right? That piece that the Isser fell into in a way that there was no Tein Tam is never going to be permitted because it's never going to actually be fully integrated with the rest of what combines. So the Shav Divergator, the Ktav Stam the Kaimalan Koiser in Tribalin Shogeg Mutarin, Mashma af Basar Bachalav, the Kulay Alma Hanan, Gam Kilo Iti Merbotai, Mimai Sha'alu Achar Hakirazo, Avagav the Anunohagin, Bachaliserin Hanan. Right, so he's like, okay, I think that the Torah is just referring to Yavesh B'Yavesh and Lach Balach cases, right? Because he's like, we do have to acknowledge that the Torah does believe, at least in Basar V'Chalav, that Hanan is an applicable principle, but it must be that he's referring to Lach Balach and Yavesh B'Yavesh scenarios, in which case he thinks even for Basar V'Chalav, Hanan doesn't occur. And the Ramah also, he's factoring in the fact that he's like, we go by what the Torah is saying here. Like, I've never seen anyone do this hakira. We see in his comments on the Shulchan Aruch, he's like, yeah, we don't do this. I don't see anybody behaving this way. So that's certainly a thing that he's like factoring in when coming up with his explanations. Right. So then he says he finds in the comments of the Shari Torah, Dafka Dvar Yavesh Yesh Linhog Hachi Dim Neter Beheter Mutar Avalo B'Dvar Lach the Kaimalan Hanan. Right, so the Shari Dora thinks that even Lach Balach we hold Hanan. Right, so Umashma the Kol Makom Amrinan Hanan Srichim Lichor Achar Hakirazo Vukadat Beit Yosef Betema Doloni Hige Lichor Betavarze V'Tzarich Lomar the Afal Gav the Machmirin Im Nodash Niter Beheter Mikol Makom Lo Machmirin Lichor Achar Zot. Right, so he's saying it would seem that in any scenario where Hanan would be an applicable principle, aka minimally balua and potentially lach balach, depending on how you hold, but you should have to do this chakira. And so he's like, well, that's difficult because, as I've just said, none of us do this chakira. How do I explain that? The answer is like, maybe we're just not so worried about like trying to figure out when the like second bit of heter fell in. Right, that if we absolutely know what the consequence of these, like the Isser falling in, there was less than Shishim, and then the Heter fell in, then probably we should do a Hakira / it should be Isser. But if we don't know that there was less than Shishim before the second amount fell in, maybe like Mistama, we don't really need to inquire. Any questions or comments on the Darthei Moshe's kind of final solution, which sorry, bad phrasing. Final suggested answer, which he still prefers the medium one. No,
Well,
no
he's
thoughts?
sort of he's going away from his idea of Noda Tarovet?
No, he prefers Nadat Tarovet, right? He still said with Nadat Tarovet, like Zed Tirutz Tachon, right? Like that's the one that he prefers amongst his like three potential answers. But it seems like there's certainly there must be
Then
something
why would you need to do
motivating
the
him.
Hakira? Because you can assume that there was that he did it by accident.
What do you mean?
Well, once you say, he said earlier that if it's not Noda, then anytime he added, we assume that it was not Noda, because why would people are religious Jews, they're not going to add and then come to the rabbi and try to trick the rabbi. If they wanted to, they could just eat treif, and they're not tricking anybody but themselves. So if they've added, it must have been b'shogeg, and it must have been because they didn't know that it already happened. So that it already mixed together. So then we don't need to do the Hakira. But now he's saying, really, we should do the Hakira, but if they don't ask, if they don't tell us that it was Noda, then we're just going to assume it wasn't Noda.
Well, I think that's part of why the Rama prefers the second teretz, right? As in he wants to explain the fact that, in fact, we don't do the Hakira, that is not the minhag, right? And so I think that's an easier thing they shave according to the middle explanation, right? That according to the Noda one, he feels convinced by his suggested reasoning for the Torah, right? Which is that we assume that once something is Noda, they would immediately go to the Chacham, right? Or they would immediately like check to see
But here he's saying,
issues are.
But here he's saying, but really, we should, any place where we do have Hanan,
right? But
we can't really on that.
Right, but he's saying that that's according to the third suggested terutz of it's about whether we're dealing with lach balach yavish biyavish or balua, right? But he ultimately prefers his middle terutz, which is where that Hanan only applies in noda tarovet, right? And so if he believes that Hanan only applies in noda tarovet, then great, then he's not so worried, because like im noda, we assume people are like paying attention and gonna go to a chacham, and im lo noda, there's no chanat. There's so shkoyach. Sarah?
Yeah, I'm just struck by the kind of contrast between him saying, I've never seen anyone go and talk about, like, go through this process on the one hand, on the other hand saying, oh yeah, I'm going to read the Beit Yosef by thinking that the Beit Yosef is assuming that any religious Jew is obviously going to go, like, deal with this problem as soon as they find out about it. Like, and there's this kind of like push and pull between his own like sociological reality and the sociological reality he's like imputing to the Beit Yosef. Which is just, it's very, I don't know, it's like historically makes a lot of sense for his particular position. And sometimes you see him like codify practices that he doesn't totally know how to explain. But it seems like, yeah, there's just an interesting question about like, what kinds of things can we assume people are consulting rabbis for, and not in what kinds of social positions, and like what are the assumptions he makes about his own reality, and what are the assumptions he thinks is reasonable to assume that other figures are making.
Yeah, I think it's also we can take a brief look at the Drisha on this, which I think also gets at kind of these dynamics, but there's a difference between maybe assuming that anyone, once something is noda, will go to a chacham, versus like how people will interact with this like pot that Isser has fallen into. Joel?
Yeah, it's just I don't think in the Ramaz world they're not asking a chacham. I think in the Ramaz world it's a critique of chachamim in some ways. It's like we don't ask when we come to people's houses, when they say to us, "Hey, I mixed stuff up," we don't say, "Hey, when did you add all this stuff beforehand or not?" That's not something we ever ask. And I think it's like an even more kind of shocking thing in that sense of like the fact that they don't ask the question is really on the chachamim of his time. So he really has to explain this in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Okay, so I want us to take a quick look. If people see the Drisha on in the Shir Devorah, it's on Rish Samech Aleph. It's within the Drisha Hey. No, sorry, it's in the Drisha Vav.
I have one word, and that is how much is sociology also lefanenu? I mean, that's the Metzias. That's the Metzias. What do you do with that? It's not like
Yeah,
a
we're
small
dealing
thing.
with our reality. Okay, so I'm looking at the bit starting with Vayen B'darchei Moshe. So in the Yoreh Deah, it's the top of the left column in the Drisha on Rish Samach Aleph. So Vayen B'darchei Moshe, Sharich B'davar, V'im Nefaresh Sheriba Alehen Kodem Shunada Ha'isor, Az they lo kashimide, Ki ken katav sham Behedya Harosh D'Bekai Gavna Gamri Savar D'Mutar. Elish Lashon Torah lo mashmaken. Shekatav ve'en lechush shemiyikaven their boats b'mezid. Right, that like the Torah is using the language of mezid. He's not using the language of noda or lo noda. So that doesn't map so well onto our middle teruts. V'gam diktav dafka b'mezid asurin shmaminad b'kahai gavna b'shogeg mutar. Right, vayinu b'noda. Right, that like, from the fact that he specifically says when it's mazid, it's usher, it would seem to be that like the Torah thinks even if you were like nodab in time, but like, you know, more heter was added b'shogeg, that it would be mutar. Mihu nira li b'dochek v'lomar al korcha tzarich lomar tam lama kshenasaf achar shenoda asor filu b'shogeg l'sfarat rabbeinu d'lo amrinan chatichat manas nevela Ella hayinu tama de kansinan le zahava le leva'er tavshil miyat shenodalo et arovet penya voli de michshol v'yesh bo tzad mezid v'zehu karui kan mezid demo ken kashe. So he's like, maybe it's that like the Torah is actually folding within the category of mezid scenarios of when he was nodab in time. Like this kind of gets up the distinction between whether, oh, you should be going to ask a chacham immediately versus like you should be doing something, right? That like Isser falls into your pot and you're just still hanging around, leaving it on the fire. Like really, why did you leave it there? Why was there a scenario in which there was possibility for more heter to be added? You should have immediately dealt with that, right? So it's kind of like Mazid. But you'll see he doesn't really love this explanation. He says multiple times that it is bidochik, but nonetheless, he wants to try and explain, as we'll see soon. The Drisha is really passionate about trying to make the Torah and the Beit Yosef make sense, even when they appear not to. I think we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll resume. We'll do a little bit about the Knas and then get into the Rashba and his various interpretations. So see folks at 10:10. So we're picking back up in the tour. Alice, can you pick up with, sorry, am I saying your name correctly? Can you pick up with Aval Hamikav?
Alish. It's
Alish,
pronounced
sorry.
Alish, like with shin in the end. Okay.
Alish, okay. Aval Hamikaven Laharbot.
אבל המכוון להרבות אפילו הוא מין במינו, וההתר רבה על האיסור שהוא בטל מן התורה. אלא שחכמים הצליחו 60, אינו בטל, כיוון שריבה במזיד. אוקיי. וכתב הרמב"ם דווקא למבטל עצמו, אם הוא שלא כנסינן לאוסרו עלי, או למי שכיוון לבטל בשבילו, אבל לאחרים נשארי. So the one who intends to add the mutar thing to the isur, even so he said, even if it's min benino shel heter, then in this case it like we need only more than half, like in order to make it mutar, right? Because the Rabbanan it's shishim, but Menatara it's just rov. Right. Wait.
Right? Saying even in a case, like even in the most seemingly makel case of min
Right.
b'mino, which is batal midoraita berov, and it's only the Rabbanan who required shishim, right? It's still aser kevan shuriba b'mezid.
Okay, right. So this thing. Okay, and the Rambam wrote that it's only for the one who adds the permitted thing, or if he intends to do it for someone else, but it's permitted for the others.
Right, and he also like he quotes us in the name of the Rambam. First of all, the Beit Yosef points out that the Rambam in fact does not mention the Misha Kiven Levatla Bishvilo, but also this is the generally agreed upon principle. It's not the Rambam's specific opinion, right? That like most agree that this is a knas, right? That like on the Osrola, but actually like the food is batel, right? Like even if like ein mevatel isur l'chachila, we are in finishing up the tour on hay. So even like if you're intending to do it, the food is batel, right? That the actual, and this again deals with our kind of like physicality versus how we're relating to it. In the physicality of this, the food has been batel, but also we think that's a bad thing for people to do, right? So we say to the person who did it themselves, they can't eat it. And if I like am, doing this because I'm like, wow, my children would love some soup with some like buttered bacon bits in it, they also can't eat it, right? But like for other people, it's permitted, right? That like there's an echo again. There we go. Right, but the Rashba is the language of like lo ahanu ma'asav hara'im, right? That like his wicked actions shouldn't be something he can benefit from, right? But like if Joe Schmo on the street wants to come eat my soup that's had buttered bacon bits, then fine, right? Like I don't get any particular hana from having butt held. So in that scenario, shkoyach, right? So this gets at our tension between like sociologically / vis-a-vis how people relate to mitzvot. We won't want people intentionally trying to get rid of Isser, right? Like we think that that's a bad way for people to relate to kashrut and to Isser and to the things that they're consuming. But if they do it, like the food has been made irrelevant. Rav Landis, was that a hand? No. Okay. Cool. There's lots more to say about this Knas, and we'll get into it a little bit more in the Shulchan Aruch, but I want us to go on to our D'Rabbanan D'Oraita distinction. So has anybody, Andres, are you there? Yes, no. Okay. Aaron, can you read in the Torah in Vav?
כתב הרשב"א, אבל דבר שעיקר איסורו אינו אלא מדרבנן, כגון גבינה של גויים ושמינו של גיד, אין מערבין אותו בהתר כדי לבטלו, עבר ועירבו בהתר כדי לבטלו, ושוגג מותר במזיד אסור. נפל מעצמו בהתר, אף על פי שאין בהתר כדי לבטלו, מותר להוסיף בהתר כדי להכשירו. כדחזינן בעצים שנשארו מן הדקל בתוך התנור ביום טוב שמותר לרבות להם עצים מוכנים להתירם.
Okay.
So the Rashba Al Pi HaTorah says that if something is purely derabanan, seemingly meaning there's no shorish in the Torah, you cannot be mevatel it l'chatchila. But if you accidentally did mevatel it l'chatchila, if you accidentally did mevatel it, then b'diavad, that's fine as long as it was b'shogeg. If it falls into something and there's a tar of it, at that point now b'diavad you can b'mezid mevatel it.
I think mazid is maybe not a good word to use here because I feel like mazid has a negative, yeah.
The kavana, you can now be mevatel it, which he thinks is analogous to the branches that fell into the oven.
Right. The paradigm that we get in the Gemara is a scenario of like they fell in, you didn't mix them in, but now you can add more heter to batel it. Okay. So that is the, as you said, Rashba al pi hator. So we'll get the Beit Yosef is gonna quote the Rashba that he has in front of him, and then he's gonna raise some kashiyas on the Torah, or one kashya in particular. Joel, could you read, so in the Beit Yosef, so this is in the Beit Yosef within Vav, where he says, Umash katav Rabbeinu bezeh, b'shem harashba, is the Dibur HaMatzil, and then picking up with afilu lahosif ala heter, it's about 8 lines down from the beginning of the Dibur HaMatzil.
ואפילו להוסיף על ההתר כדי לבטלו, לא
Yeah.
אמרו אלא בסרים שעיקרן של דבריהם בלבד. Right, so I started reading a little too fast there, but okay, so even to add to the heter and to make it batel, to negate it, we only said that when about Isrim that where they're, and I think who just read it, was it Aaron? You know, their root is really in rabbinically.
Also, for the record, he's quoting the Rashba right now. This
Yeah.
next large chunk will be him quoting the Rashba.
וכמו שאמרנו, ויש מי שאומר, דאיסורים דרבנן שאין להם עיקר מדאורייתא, כבשולי גויים וגבינתם, שאין להם עיקר מדאורייתא, אלא משום גזירה בלבד, ותרומת חוץ לארץ וחלת חוץ לארץ, מערבין אותם לכתחילה בידיים בתוך רוב של היתר, ואוכלים אותם. All right, so there's an opinion that if it's fully derabanan, right, it's just a gezerah, as he puts it. I don't mean justice and like to be cheap about it, but that it only comes from gezerah derabanan, and there's no root in doraita. And his examples are a non-Jew cooks something, right, bishul akum, cheese of we're not non-Jews, or true things that are really called ba'aretz, but we practice them chutz la'aretz, right, derabanan. Although you could make an argument for those that they maybe have an ikar deraita. Then you can, even with like physically with your hands, go ahead and add stuff to them to make them batel and to eat them.
Which also, to be clear, part of the reason he uses this example is we have a Gemara elsewhere where it talks about like Rabbah would just mix trua chutz la'aretz with other stuff and eat it when he was tameh. Right, that like we have a Gemara supporting the idea of we have chachamim who are seemingly biyadayim lechatchila just mixing up trumat chutz la'aretz to batelet. Okay, continue.
ויש לו קצת על מה שיסמוך, מדאמרינן בפרק עד כמה, תרומת חוץ לארץ מבטלה ברוב, ויש מי שאומר שאין מקילין כן לבטל איסור לכתחילה, אפילו ביסורים של דבריהן, שאין להם, אפילו ביסורים של דבריהם שאין להם עיקר בדאורייתא. ובתרומת חוץ לארץ הוא שכאילו יותר משאר איסורים. All right, and so there's an opinion that is the trumat chutz la'aretz, even though we actually have a case of this, that's sui generis as opposed to everything else, which is asur. All right, v'chein katav haRamban, v'chein katav haRamban.
And what's the argument for doing that for truma?
I mean, we'll see also that he's going to bring something from Rabbi Shimshon about something that also might make the truma case even less significant. But I think part of the idea also is that like there are so many levels to this kula that like in general, truma chutz la'aretz, it's like, as Joel said, you could make an argument as to why that should be considered like yesh, like shoshav b'doraita, but like,
yeah. So you could say
the clear doraita concept of truma and challah is that these are mitzvot haaretz, right? The very idea of that.
Being mevatel, the truma may be considered a chumrah.
Right. That like, yeah, isn't even having to do bitul at all, let alone just eating things and not worrying about that is already a chumrah. That like we already say that like truma, bismanenu is already derabanan even ba'aretz, right? So to be talking about truma chutz la'aretz is like so many levels distant from really the ikar of that mitzvah and Isser for eating it. So also another reason, continue Joel for Rabbi Shimshon.
ורבי שמשון כתב בפרק בתרא דחלה, שאפילו לבטלה ברוב, לא אמרו אלא לכהן טמא, Aval hetirel zarim lo, right? This is that where we permit doing bitul on truma. That's only if for the kohen tameh. So it's a kohen tameh interacting with truma chutz la'aretz. There we make an exception, but in all, we don't let someone like me who's just a Yisrael, be mevatel the truma and then eat it. So even if though it's chutz la'aretz truma. Okay, I keep going.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so he's got a nice list here. Hachad, Isur Torah, afilu shuro derabanan. Right. So first one is it's a Torah Isur. It doesn't matter if the, maybe Deraita it was Batel Barov and now it's Batel B'Shishim, derabanan. Afal pishin afalato heter she'ein bo shiur levatlo, ein mosifin alav heter kedei levatlo, ve'ein sarich lomar she'ein me'arvin oto bi'adayim kedei levatlo. Okay. So in that case, you can't add to it. You definitely can't, mix it up with your hands to make it batel. And what happens if you did it? Avaro vitel oshri ba'alav im b'shogeg mutar v'mezid asur lemishnit batel be'avuro. All right. So in that case, as we saw, if it's done accidentally, nonetheless, it's mutar. And if it's mezid for the person, the intended target of the food, cannot eat it. So, okay, that's one. Isur shel divrehem sheyesh lo ikar b'doraita. Sorry, I got to go next to the page. Just flip the page. Ein maravino tobi adayim kedei levatlo v'masakein mezid asur aval im nafal me'atzmo ve'im beheter kedei levatlo marbe elav matlo. All right. So what about something that's derabanan but it has an ikar deraita? Right there. If it was, you can't intentionally put the thing in, right, and then be mevatel it. You're like, oh, a little piece of pork in my soup, not a problem, I know the pork isn't derabanan, but I didn't think of a good example there. But if it fell in on its own, if I didn't push it in, didn't put it in accidentally, b'shogeg, but it just fell on its own.
A little bit of milk fell into my chicken.
Exactly. It got knocked in. I don't know. It was dripping from the ceiling, whatever it was. But chicken is a good example there, and milk, and we don't have enough in order to make it batel. Then I'm allowed to add to it and make it batels, right? The milk into the chicken soup that fell accidentally, I could then add more chicken soup and batel it. All right, final category, I believe. Isur shel divrehen she'ein lo ikar b'doraita ketrumat v'chalat chutz la'aretz me'arvino v'atlino tam berov lechatchila. All right, there. Right, you can lechatchila, like I have this truma sitting around, I really need some food, I want to eat it. You can just start adding to it, good to go. All right. Via shamim shelo amruchen ela betrumat v'chalat chutz la'aretz. Right there, yeah. See, now it makes more sense because he added in challah in that case, which makes the whole thing work better. Aval lo b'shar yisurim, but not for anything else. Fish lachush livrehem adkan. So there's a three nice categories of the Beit Yosef lays out for us.
So that's that was still the Rashba, right? So that's
that was all the Rashba. Sorry, yes.
Up to that concept.
Could you quickly review those three categories?
Right. So we have number one, Doraita. You definitely cannot mix a Doraita Isser into some heter to batel it. If it fell into some heter and it hasn't been batelled, you also cannot add more heter to complete the necessary shear. If you did that b'shogeg, the food is still permitted for you to eat. B'mezid, it's forbidden for you. That's number one. Isser d'Rabbanan, that's it's ikar is doraita. You cannot mix it into some heter to mevatel it, but if it fell into your heter and there isn't a sufficient shear to batel it, you can add more heter, so it's batel. And Isser d'Rabbanan that and lo ikar min Torah, like for example, our truma and chalat chutz la'aretz, you can lichatchila decide to just mix in with some heter to batel it. These are the three categories, and at the end he adds this. There's some people who say this only applies to truma v'chalat chutz la'aretz, but lo b'shar yisurim, and he says yesh l'chush l'divreham. So this will be a big point. So look at the end of this Beit Yosef, 3 lines from the bottom in the left column. V'yesh l'tmoa. Andreas, are you able to read? I can't, Andre, sorry, if you're speaking, we can't hear you. Okay. Rav Nachum, can you read V'yesh Litmal Rabbeinu? You're currently, yeah, muted.
Sorry, where are you?
3 lines from the bottom on the left column of this Beit Yosef, Resh Samech Daled. Yesh Litmal Rabbeinu Shekatav B'Shem Rashba. It's on the page where there's just Beit Yosef and Jerisha, nothing else.
Sorry, I don't find it.
No worries. Is there anybody who has it who can read?
Oh yeah, there I found it. Yesh Litmal. Yesh Litmal al Rabbeinu. Shekatav B'Shem Rashba. The davar she'ikaro midrabanan. Shenitarev beheter. Mosif alav umavatlo. Me'achar she'af al pi shehu sover kein. Katav sheyesh lachush ledivrei ha'osrim. Lo hava le'Rabbeinu liktov bishmo stam leheter. Yeah, what do you want to, what,
Great. So what's the Beit Yosef's issue with the Torah? Aaron?
Well, I think they both seem to have confused the Rashba's categories, but the Beit Yosef thinks that the Rashba, his qualification on his third category, that the third category is actually the second category, and that's where the qualification is, i.e. that something that has no shorish doraita, there is a yesh omrim on the one hand that you might be able to bet the eved mosif onto it, and an opinion that you shouldn't. And when he says that we should listen to the Machmir opinion, he's talking about this least serious isser that we still shouldn't mosif on that, even though that does not seem to the Rashba say.
Right. So the Beit Yosef thinks that the Rashba, that the Yesh Machmirin believe that even for Yisrei D'Rabbanan and Lahani Karmina Torah, the only ones you could even mosif levatel are Truma and Chalet Chutz La'aretz. But anything else you couldn't even add heter to batel it, let alone mix it in biyadayim, right? And so then he's like, okay, even though the Rashba really thinks you should be able, his own svara is that you should be able to losif on Yisrei D'Rabbanan she'en lahem karmina Torah. He says yesh lachush l'divrei machmirin, right? So how could the Torah just write this opinion as a name stam with no qualification? So as Aaron pointed out, this does not necessarily seem to be the most intuitive understanding of the Rashba. And somebody was so bothered by this that they wrote a shaila to the Drisha. So if people look on Reish Samech Gimel, we have the Drisha Zayin. It starts with Sheila v'tshuva, which I don't know, somebody who has learned more Shulchan Aruch than me can say. I've never seen a Sheila in the Drisha before. I'm sure it appears somewhere else, but I don't think it's common. Rav Nachum, Rav Landis, anyone know if this is a thing that appears elsewhere?
It's uncommon enough to point it out.
Great. Okay, so I am most certainly not going to look at this entire Drisha, because fascinating though it is incredibly massive. But we are going to look at the Shaila and go through the very basics of his tshuva. So the Shaila, so we quote this thing, Katav HaRashba, quoting from the Torah. So we say, Habeit Yosef, Hevi divrei harashba ba'arichut mitorat habayit ha'aruch ayin sham. Right. So the Beit Yosef, as we Joel just read, brought a large chunk of the Rashba word for word. ואחר כך כתב בית יוסף, ויש לתמוע על רבינו שכתב בשם הרשב"א דבר שעיקרו מדרבנן, שנתערב בהתר, נוסיף עליו מצווה, מאחר שאף על פי שהוא סובר כן, כתב שיש לחוש לדברי האוסרין, לא הבלה רבינו לכתוב בשמו סתם בהתר. Right, so that's what Rav Nachum just read. ויש לי לתמוע על הבית יוסף, but I am surprised by the בית יוספ's תמיהה, שהבין מה שכתב הרשב"א, ויש אומרים דלא אמרו שמערבין לכתחילה אלא תרומה לחלק חוץ לארץ, אבל לא בשאר איסורין, רוצה לומר בשאר איסורין אפילו להוסיף אסור, משום הכי כתב על התור ויש לתמוע וכולי, מי דחק אותו לפשט זה? דהווה פירושו כפשוטו, אבל לא בשאר איסורין, רוצה לומר דלכתחילה אסור לבטלו, אבל להוסיף מותר. Right? So this person is saying that like the shot of the yesh misho there, like in the Rashba, is that it is only coming to comment on the third category, right? Where he just said in the third category that you can even lichatchila biyadayim mix in the Yisrei Rabbanan and the Haim Kar Mina Torah, and to say no, that actually is only specifically to Truma Achalet Chutz La'aretz. Nothing else is in the category of Marvim biyadayim, right? That this guy is like, that seems to be the only thing being limited, right? So why did the Beit Yosef understand this as saying you can't even add heter to any other Yisrei Rabbanan that fall in, right? According to the way the more intuitive understanding, Kain Masha Katav Rashba, v'yesh lechush, Kaya Masha Katav, yesh omer she'asor lechatchila levatlo, v'al kain tzarich lefarish ken, v'al korcha tzarich lefarish ken, l'fi Masha Katav hator b'shem Rashba, davar she'ikaro midirabanan, in Marvino Talechatchila, Barashba Katav Shemutar Le'erbo. Ella al Korcha Shator Katav Dato, Lefi Masha Katav Rashba, V'ish Lechush, V'afilu Hachi Katav Hator Bishmo Shemutar Lehosif, Mashma Behet Yesh Af Lefi Masha Katav V'ish Lechush, Mutar Lehosif, Svirele, Ukamash Katavti. Right? That like, he's saying, I think that the Tmiah that Yosef had on the Torah is ridiculous. The Torah understood the Rashba in the way that I do, which is that like the only thing being limited is the Marvim biyadayim, right? But Lahosif is fine, like across the board for the Durabanan Isurim, certainly She'en Lahen Ikar Mina Torah. But now he's not done. This Shoel isn't done with his kashyas. Adarabba yesh litmo al Torah. Shikata b'shem harashba davar sheikaro midirabanan v'chulei mutar lahosif. Mashma dvarav davar she'asor midirabanan v'ikaro d'oraita asor lahosif. V'harashba katav shemutar lahosif. Right? As Aaron said, we also could argue that the Torah has misunderstood the Rashba, because according to like the Torah seems to say that only things that are asor d'Rabbanan and ikaro d'Rabbanan, which we would seem to think is in lehen shorash mina Torah, that those are the only ones where you can even add heter, livotlo, right? But he's like, according to the Rashba's three categories, it seems that he said even Yisrei Rabbanan sheyesh lahem ikar min Torah, that you can mosif alehem livotlam, right? So this guy, I feel like it's very, I found it very satisfying first reading the Shaila, because those both seem like intuitive issues with the Torah and the Beit Yosef. And presumably that's why the Drusha included it, because he's like, yeah, you make some great points. And so like I said, we're not going to read through the Drusha, but just a brief peek at his response. Basically, his first suggestion is that something we see come up multiple times is the idea that the Torah didn't have the Torah Tabayit Haruch. So he suggests that the Torah's understanding comes from the Torah Tabayit HaKatzar. Right. And so any seeming misunderstandings or things he left out or whatever are coming from the fact that he didn't have the text of the Torah Tabayit Haruch. And the Beit Yosef, he like explains at length how the Beit Yosef is in fact correctly understanding the Rashba, that the Yesh Misha Oser is in fact limiting not only the Marvim Biyadayim, but even the Mosif Levatel. right? He points out this really smart distinction that we see the language of like la'arev is what's used when it means like adding something l'chachila, and livatel is used seemingly as a distinct category of when you add more heter to batel something. He goes through this at length. He explains why the Beit Yosef is actually correct, and that the entire three categories the Rashba put are only according to the Yesh Makilim, right? That like, even though it seems like he just gave those three categories some, he was only writing them according to the opinion of the Yesh Makilim, and that's not how he holds. But after spending, if you look at Reish Samech Daled, all of that is him giving this explanation. On Reish Samech Hey, the Drisha is like, all that being said, I have several kashyas on my explanation as to why it actually maybe isn't ideal. So his alternative explanation is that the Torah is the one who's really correct, and the Beit Yosef kind of misread him. That we were reading the Torah, his language, where if you look at the Torah on this, right, that he says the Isurim that they're like Ikar is midirabanan, right? And sorry, Ikar Yisro Eno El midirabanan, and that this is a different language than Ein Len Shoresh Mina Torah. He's saying that when the Torah says Ikar Isuro Ena El midirabanan, he's referring to something that is a durabanan iser, not a doraita iser that has been batel to a durabanan level, right? He's saying this phrasing includes even a durabanan iser that like yesh lo shoresh min haTorah. And so that's how the Torah is not misrepresenting the Rashba, and that this resolves at least the kashya on the Torah. On the Beit Yosef is just this kind of goes back to something I was saying earlier, which is that it's often hard when we have these seemingly difficult sections. Lehatzdik get like everybody, right? Often when we have a kind of difficult to explain section and somebody else trying to explain them, it's hard to make everybody make perfect logical sense. Often we end up having to kind of lilamed zchut on one person's reading and explain somebody else's kind of misreading something or another. But I think it's just like a very smart attempt to explain this very kind of the Bach just says they're both wrong. The Bach is Joel, I think, made this comment to me a while ago that the Bach, part of what makes him so interesting is he has absolutely kind of no sort of need to defend the Beit Yosef, a little bit more to defend the Torah sometimes, but the Bach feels no need to explain the Beit Yosef as being correct. So he can often be very fun to read for that reason. But I think it's also very interesting to see how the Drisha like attempts to make sense of these seemingly not so sensible reads of the Rashba. I realize there's a lot of information at once. People have comments on this Drisha before we move on, / the whole Rashba, Durabanan, Doraita categories. Okay, cool. Let's go.
I'm sorry, maybe I'll ask, actually, we will get to the Rambam. Shall we get to the Rambam, or we just, because it seems that Rambam goes like very far in his position, right? Like, is it, I think that what he's saying is that even the second category, if you can basically be doing lechatchila, is that correct, or is it?
Right. So the Rambam, there's different interpretations of the Rambam, as there are different ones of the Rashba. The Rambam, a simple reading does indicate that he would potentially say any Isser Durabanan. It says can be batal lechatchila, but again, that gets at our question of whether we're using bitul to mean lehosif or la'arev, right? That like.
Right. I mean, like, if you look at his languages, he gives an example, right? He says like, where is it? Somewhere here. Right. כיצד חלב שנפל לגדילה שיש בה בשר ועוף ונתן.
Right, so it's a case of nafal, right? So that's not le'arev.
okay.
That's a case of
Okay.
lahosif, right? So it seems like he's working off of the Eitzim Shenashrumin Hadekel scenario, right? Where the paradigm that we get in the Gemara,
No, but
of-
it says marbe alav basar of, right?
Right.
So it looks like you intentionally add basar of in order to make it rov.
right, so that would be like according to things how we were reading the Rashba's middle category, right?
Mm.
That the Rambam, if that's his paradigm, is not necessarily saying there's anything that you can take that I could like take some chalav and pour it into my chicken soup knowing it'll be bateled, but that if some chalav fell into my chicken soup and there wasn't shishim opposite it, I could add more.
Right, sure. It's
Right?
not the lechatchila thing like with adding mixed and milk, but it's like the tikkun of the soup. So it's for sure like adding intentionally. Yeah, I just wondered if anybody says anything about that, because it seems to go like very far from.
Wait, what's that word, tikkun?
Yeah, well, I use the word tikkun.
Is that a Prague thing? I mean, with tikkun here?
No, but it seems like yeah, you would have to throw it out, so you
Okay.
you do something
All right.
with it.
Right.
I get suspicious when I hear that word. So
I mean, so the thing is, we do end up essentially, this is essentially how we end up holding, which is also like the kind of understanding of the more expansive understanding of the Rashba, right? That with any Isur Durabanan, you can be Mosif the Batel, right? That if it falls in, you can add more Heter to Batel it, right? But this does seem to be according to, certainly when I first read that Sugya in Beitza, I think the most straightforward reading is, remember when we say like the Hane Mile, B'Doraita of a B'Durabanan, Mivatlin, right? And so if we use the Eitzim Shenashrimei Dekel as our paradigm, right, that like it's Isser that fell in, you didn't choose to mix it in, but it fell in and it's a Durabanan Isser, you can choose Levatel it, right? And the Mikla Kale Isura is just for Ravashi. But that's not how everybody reads the Sugya. So that being said, back in the Torah, Adonai Harush. Sorry, did somebody have a hand raised? Okay. Raphael, could you pick up with Adonai Harush in the Torah?
Yes, just a second. Yes. עוד פעם. וכן עם מסקנת אדוני אבי הראש.
In Rish Samach Hey in the Shir Devorah, Adonai Harush Sal Katav Afilu.
Again, pardon? I lost you for a second.
This is in Vav. This is like the end of Vav in the Torah, where it's on Rish Samach Hey, Adonai Harush Sal Katav Afilu.
Yes, ואדוני אבי הראש ז"ל כתב, ואפילו איסור דרבנן שנתערב, אסור לא יוסיף עליו לבטלו, ולא יתירו אלא ביצים שנשרו לזור התנור, משום דמיקל קל איסורה. So basically, I'll finish the phrase only, just a second. So איסור שנתבט על כגון סמך. No, that's another. That's a different sentence. Yeah. So Das Arosh is the Rosh goes back to the Gemara, and says that and like has a more essential reading of the heter of Eitzim Shenashru. That it's only because the Isur doesn't actually exist anymore. The Isur doesn't have any type of heker at all. It's not that it itarev or something like that. It simply is annihilated. But in any other situation, you can't actually, even in Isur Rabbanon, you can't le'isif alav le'atiro. You can't add onto it to metaken.
Right, and specifically, we see the Mikla Kale Isura is not just being a teirutz for Rav Ashi, and the question of like a Devar Sheyesh Lo Matirin, but is just fundamentally modifying the statement of like Aval B'Durabanan Mivatlin, that it's like going back to our previous section. Okay, so that's the Rosh's stance, and then now we have our last little section, Isur Shenit Batel.
איסור שנתבטל כגון שהיה סמך כנגדו, שהיה שישים כנגדו, ונתפס בו אחר כך מן האיסור, חוזר ונאסר, לא שנה מין ומינו ולא שנה מין בשאינו מינו, בין בלח בין ביבש. Again, basically what the Torah is saying is that the bitul doesn't cancel it out the possibility of actually using it adding on to more isur to become again asur.
Right, that this is like the kind of principles of kama kama batel and choser v'neor coming up against each other. That we saw the sugyot on kama kama batel, the idea of like, something was batel, and now not only is it batel, but it combines the rest of the heter to mevatel something that's joining it. But ultimately, we say like there's a limit to that. Actually, kama kama batel isn't really a principle. There's only one person who really sticks by it. Who's the one Rishon that really doubles down on kama kama batel?
Rashi. I'm sorry. No, I was thinking of another principle.
The Rav, yes, father, isn't it?
The Ravid. It's the Ravid. He goes all in. But as the Beit Yosef points out, pretty much basically nobody agrees with the Ravid. I think it's the Ravid and the Ravan, I believe, are the two who really double down on kama kama batel. But we end up saying, and especially like certainly when it comes to not scenarios, that like as multiple people point out, it would be crazy to actually really go full in on kama kama batel and mim b'she'eno mino, because what? It keeps like, my little chalav keeps dripping into my cholent, and eventually I have like 50% milk in my cholent, but like it's okay because kama kama batel. It's like, no, you would be eating something that tastes like basar v'chalav, right? Yeah, you're thinking of mim mino. That is something that Rashi is pretty unique in holding. Right. So most people do not agree with the Rav.
The little bach there, the dash FLP. So it's like a good comment towards the end of the bach.
In what number Bach?
The dash FLP, dash FLP shaskamas aposkin.
Oh, you mean the Beit Yosef?
You know what? I'm sorry. Yeah, right. Did you read it?
Yeah. Do you want to read it, Rav Landis?
No. The dash FLP shaskamas aposkin the din zeh shelo kediver Ravid ein lichos. B'nei kach l'shakos Rabbeinu b'sof siman savchel kol sheyesh shishim keneged Yisur mevatlin oso afil ein hashishim kulo heter. So you have that. Well, I guess you said it well already. What Raphael said about annihilation. The master misham the Yisur mistaret leheter levatel is the Yisur. The shani hasam shehem shnei minei Yisur. Hilkach kol echad mistaret ima heter levatel is chavero. We've had that before, but now we see it very nicely being used in a practical sense for us. The shnayim minacha, they lose their power. Kihacha matzah min et mino the nior, so it's be a dime v'bahachi nicha shrabenu apal pisha kasav ahida siman tzariches lo nimna melichtov zeh. I mean, what do you think it means? Lo nimna melichtov zeh.
I think it's like it's still a worthy opinion to like consider and to include, right?
So the question is, it has a use, right? Because when we say lichos, we're saying is the shita of the Ravid is not mevutal. The shita is it's not we don't get rid of it completely. It's lying there, and there's places where it can be used.
Well, right.
As if we have two meaning.
The idea
it's valuable to have. In which you have a makom heter there. It's very valuable.
Right. The idea of Isser being able to cancel other Isser is one that like we do hold by, but he's just saying that like, right, this gets back to our idea of, Tom being, no pun intended, like the Ikar of what we're dealing with, right? That like when you're dealing with the same mean, it's Choser V'Neor because you are adding to that same Tom that had been Batel. So it's now going to be like present, right? The idea that the same flavor could cancel more of that flavor of the Isser is just actually not reflective of the like physiological fact. And this also gets back to like how much we're dealing with like conceptual relationships versus the actual physicality. But like kama batel, we can talk about that conceptually all we want, but ultimately once you can taste Isser, we're like, no, we can't use some construction of saying that's batel. Like that is not what this entire form of butyl was supposed to mean, right? Whereas when it's different Isurim, then the flavor of one Isser is actively making the flavor of the other Isser like not noticeable so much that
And
like
if you,
if there's
and if you can't taste it,
hey, if you can't taste it, it's hot though. I mean, if you can't taste it and you have shishims, that's
right?
okay. Keep going, Joel.
Except it also applies to mean no, right? So it's not just about the fact that you can taste it. There's something else going on there, I think.
There's something else going on as well, but they end up basically saying when they say it doesn't apply even to mean no, they say like, okay, yes, even though it means no, you technically can't taste the Isser because if you like it were mean no, it would be near gash, right? Which says, I mean, like we have these like, different ideas of times when we say, even though taste isn't present here, if it were to be XYZ, it would be, right? And I think that we can see it either as actually kind of like a Shema blank sort of scenario that really there's nothing so wrong with this, but like if it were to be a meme mino, it would be problematic. And so we say it's forbidden here too. Or we could say, as Joel seems to be getting at, that there's something besides just the taste thing here, that also actually we do have a conceptual issue with the idea of like, okay, now 2/3 of my bore is yain nesech, but I'm gonna say that it's all fine because really like each drop was batel, that like even if I couldn't taste the difference, that something feels intuitively wrong about that.
I'm not sure what Achron specifically says that, but I think that there is a hakira about that on Tam Ke'ikar, on the Agdara of Tam. Like it seems when we read the Rishonik sources that Tam is actually the possibility of tasting it actually. So there you have your kushia of if I can't taste it because it means bemino. But there is if we say Tam Ke'ikar, we go all the way through of it. I think maybe it's Rebbe Elchanan that says the Tam Ke'ikar, it's simply the we say that there is like the marak of Isur is here. It's like an existence that is tangible through Tam, but it's not the Tam as itself. That's the actuality, Joel, you were talking about, I think. Because it's actually there.
You're saying time is a symptom or indication,
yeah, exactly.
Semen. And that's a semen, it's an indication. But not that was only time. Okay.
I don't think it makes sense to start the Shulchan Aruch with 4 minutes left. Joel, it seems like you had something to say.
I just had a question because this Dean seems like really important to me in terms of like everything that's ever batel needs an asterisk with it. It's like, but if you happen to add that same thing again, like I don't know if you saw anybody who says like if there's enough distance between when like let's say a little bit of something asur gets added. And, like I'm thinking about it, for instance, in manufacturing, right? Isurim get, little bits of them get, and, kashrut agencies ignore them, right? Because they know it's a very little amounts, right? Accidentally happen, at least as far as I know. But like if I then accidentally added in the same mean as got added in back in the factory, I'd have to worry about that. I have to know every little thing that got added in. So does somebody say like at some point you'd have to, you can stop caring about this or?
Well, I think also part of the idea would presumably be that like whatever we're discounting from, I don't know of a specific Achron who addresses that particular question, so I can look into that. But like, I think also if we're dealing with something that like kashrut agencies are saying is so insignificant that it becomes batel in the factory, odds are we're probably also not even dealing with something that's like 1 in 63 parts, such that if you added like a little bit fell in your place, suddenly it'll be choser v'neor. Like, and again, I don't have the legit. I don't have the data on exactly the.
You got it
percentage.
reversed. This is why they didn't want to have factories.
Right, but I think part of the issue, like,
No,
I think
I'm
part of the idea
serious.
is that most likely the things being added in the factory are going to be like 1/400th, most of whatever you're dealing with, such that it wouldn't really be particularly relevant for your ratios when it comes to Choser V'Neor, right? That ultimately, even if it was combining with whatever you add, like, but also after a while, it would probably be some form of Tam Mifgam, depending on what reality we're dealing with. So,
Well, so here's the reality of Pesach, okay? In terms of Pesach and Yerushalayim and most of Eretz Yisrael, almost all the hechsherim for factories are really done, or are done not by the Rabbanut Rashit, but are done by American and other kashrus organizations. Why? Because my Alta Zeta, with Tzvi Pesach Frank, says it's never kosher on Pesach. All the family never ate anything from the fat because it's not kosher. It's not mavutal because things always get in. And who invented factories anyway?
well, right, but that's why you just get things before Pesach, and chametz before Pesach is batel b'shishim, and so as long as you got it before Pesach, it's fine. But we'll get into chametz at some other point. In the meantime, shkayach, in the first half of next year, we will go through the Shulchan Aruch and some Nosei Kelim on this, and then I don't know who's teaching the next bit, but whoever that is.
I'll send out sources about Siman Kuf.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeshkayach.
Stuff.
Bye,
Clear,
Lexie.
Lexie. Thank you very much.
It's good.
Thanks,
Thank
Lexie.
you, bye.